a herbarium for the Brown County State Park. He has more than 10 years of leading wildflower.
Stephanie, we've lost your audio. Just give it a second. I think it's, there you go. You should be good now.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. Y'all didn't hear any of that?
Well, we didn't hear maybe the last 4 or 5 seconds.
Oh, okay. The last 4 or 5 seconds. Just that he's spent more than 10 years leading wildflower walks in county and state parks in Indiana. And he's a Morgan County Master Gardener Gold, which is way up there on the Master Gardener scale. And with that said, I'll turn it over to David to give us a little more personal background.
Thank you, everybody. I know the screen says I'm Lisa McPhee, but she's the one that set up this Zoom account, so it's got her name on it. I am David Mow. As she said, as Stephanie said, I am a Master Gardener Gold. Been an active Master Gardener since 2004. I started because I was a vegetable gardener and wanted to grow as much of my food as I can. Then I also took Master Naturalist and became a member of the Indiana Native Plant Society in 2005. I bought my first field guide because I wanted to determine which of the 3 sunflowers I was seeing was Jerusalem artichoke. Because when you're collecting wild plants, one of the keys is you have to positively identify it. And 30 plus years later, I'm one of the top plant identification guys in the state of Indiana. And I do lead wildflower hikes at Brown County State Park. You may be familiar with the Florathon coming up at the end of the month. This year, because of COVID, they're limiting all the hikes to 15 people, and you have to pre-register. I will be leading 3 different hikes. Friday the 23rd at 3:30 at the north end of the park. And then I've got 2 hikes, one in the Ogle Hollow Nature Preserve, Saturday the 24th, and we'll also be taking a hike to Kelp Village with the naturalist, and he'll be talking about the history of the park. So I'll go ahead and see if I can share my screen. So can everybody see that now?
Yep.
Good, thank you. So this is a talk about spring ephemerals. If you look at the top of the bar that's showing people, there is a spot where you can remove those photos of the people so that you can see all the nice, pretty pictures. This is a spring beauty bee on a spring beauty. Now, hopefully everybody that's a master gardener knows that you're not going to go out and just buy some plant and plop it in the ground. everything is location, location, location. And like in real estate, native plants have certain requirements for where they will grow. You'll not find all these growing in the same place. Some prefer acidic soils of the Knobstone Ridge. Some prefer the alkaline soils of the limestone belt, and some will grow in either location. Some need wetter locations, like creek bottoms. Some will grow in drier sites on ridge tops. And some of these plants will prefer north or east facing slope that's cooler and moisture, and some will grow on the south or west facing slopes. Now, as mentioned, I am invasive species specialist for Morgan County. And so I'll talk a little bit about invasives. You have to realize that some of these invasive species will prevent the growth of native species, either through the production of toxins, like in the bush honeysuckle that you'll see here. Another one that's known for that is garlic mustard, or they grow so thick and leaf out so early that they'll shade out the native plants. You should know what is invasive, and there's a list of 126 species labeled as invasive in Indiana. And then there is the terrestrial plant rule that makes it illegal to sell, trade, transport these plants, and there's 44 species in the state of Indiana. And it's recommended you don't plant anything considered invasive. Now, you need to know that a lot of the spring ephemerals take several years to reach maturity and to flower. Some are 7 to 8 years, and therefore some are considered rare from over collecting in the wild. If you buy any of these, make sure it's from a reputable dealer, and they probably will be expensive because this nurseryman had to grow it for several years before he sells it. If you start them from seed, it may take 8 years for them to flower. Now, as I'm giving this presentation, I'm going to be utilizing the common names that will be found in Kay's Field Guide to Indiana Wildflowers. And this may be different from what you find in other field guides. So just realize that a lot of them have multiple common names. The scientific names, the binomial that I use is as up to date as I know, but the genus and specific epitaph are changing so fast because of DNA testing that it's hard to keep up to date on all the current scientific names. Now, this is the harbinger of spring, one of the earliest of the spring ephemerals. It's also called salt and pepper. It is a native member of the carrot family. You may be familiar with some of the other carrots like Queen Anne's lace and poison hemlock. The genus name is Greek, meaning born as spring, usually found in creek bottoms, late March, early April. The tuber is edible, and this can be grown in your garden if you have rich, moist soil. Spring Beauty, another one of the early bloomers, grows in similar habitats, generally in moist soils. Also grows from an edible tuber. The flowers can be white with pink stripes all the way to all white. They have 5, rarely 6 petals. Although this year I have seen 8 to 10 6-petaled flowers in one day. And you'll notice here that they have a grass-like leaf that can get 6 to 9 inches long after they've flowered. A lot of people don't realize that each one of these flowers lasts one day, but each plant will have large quantities of flowers. So they bloom over an extended period of time. Yellow trout lily. This is one of the most photographed spring wildflowers. People just love to see the trout lilies. And it has 3 petals and 3 yellow sepals. You may find large colonies of this plant with only about 0.5% flowering in that colony. It also does not produce seeds well. They're not quite as well pollinated as a lot of other flowers. And so only about 10% of the 0.5% that flowers actually produces seeds. And then it can take 4 to 7 years before the tough seeds will produce flowers. The seeds are spread by ants. This is the mottled leaved white trout lily. Also goes by other names like adder's tongue, dogtooth violet, or white fawn lily. Then that all pertains to different parts of the plant. This species I've found will be more likely to be growing in creek bottoms or river bottoms, whereas the yellow will grow in higher but still moist sites. This is another spring wildflower blooming right now, the false ruin anemone, and it'll almost always have 5 petal-like sepals. These are not actually petals. Then the leaves, you'll notice, are deeply notched. This is often confused with ruin anemone that I'll show you next. And ruin anemone, generally white, but it can be pink. Usually the first flower that blooms will be quite a bit larger than the secondary blooms. And it has 6 to 9 petal-like sepals. And the leaves have 3 leaflets that are shallowly lobed. You'll notice how these don't have a deep indentation on the leaves. This usually is found singly or in small groups of 2 or 3 plants, whereas the false rue generally will be found in colonies. Marsh marigold, as the name implies, this can be found where it's consistently wet. This has toxic chemicals that make it deer resistant, and it can cause skin irritation if handled. It is also one that has petal-like sepals, and this can be found in the nursery trade. You just want to make sure that you don't mistake this for the lesser celandine fig buttercup that is horribly invasive, will produce monocultures. And it's generally also found in creek bottoms and river bottoms and is spreading south from Indianapolis and other places where it was planted as a decorative plant. White baneberry, also called doll's eyes because of the fruit. White berries have a black spot on the end. This has also been called a pointer plant because it grows in the same habitat as ginseng that I showed earlier. The berries are toxic to humans and can cause a heart attack if eaten. Another highly loved spring ephemeral is the Dutchman's breeches. It's called that because of the upside down pantaloons appearance to the flowers. You'll see the legs of the pants. It's also sometimes called little blue staggers because of the narcotic and toxic substances that affect cattle if eaten. And this blooms early and grows from a pink or white corm.
David, we have a question.
Sure.
How can you tell the difference between petals and sepals?
It's generally a microscopic study of how they are attached to the inflorescence. I hope that is enough of an explanation.
I'll let you know, I guess, if it's not.
Okay. Squirrel corn. This one is related to the Dutchman's breeches, and it gets its name from the yellow corm that it grows from. Sometimes in the fall, you'll see these that have been dug up by squirrels, and it looks like a little kernel of corn out in the woods. The squirrel does not eat the corn because it is also toxic, but they're burying their acorn and accidentally dig this up. Being less toxic than Dutchman's breeches and is therefore more or likely to be eaten by deer, it's mainly spread by seed. Because of deer possibly eating this one and not Dutchman's breeches, may be the reason I've not been able to find this in Brown County State Park. Earlier, it was mentioned that I am creating a herbarium for the Nature Center, and I'm trying to collect specimens of every species in the park. And in 7 years, I've never found squirrel corn in Brown County State Park. Virginia bluebells. This is one that wants to be in a wooded floodplain and can be planted in drier sites, but it may not thrive. A lot of people want to try and plant these in their yards, and they just do not do well because they like creek bottoms, moist wooded sites. The flower buds are pink, but then when they open, they'll turn blue. And you can see some of these pink buds that haven't quite opened up yet. Sometimes you'll see this when they do open, they stay pink, and then very rarely they'll be white from the time they bud to opening. Large flowered bellwort, also called big marybells. This is a fairly tall plant, up to 30 inches, and is usually forked with either 2 or 3 branches that are drooping from the weight of the leaves and the flowers, sometimes making the flowers hard to see. They'll be hanging down and the leaves may cover them up. The stem goes through the leaf, and you just about see it here at the top, and that's called a perfoliate leaf, like the endangered glandular bellwort, wood marybells. But if you see these, the rare one, you'll see how these tepals are straight and not curved like in the large flowered bellwort or the big marybells. I've never seen the rare one. I have heard that south of Lake Monroe, there's a small colony of them. Jack in the pulpit, when young, this much beloved wildflower will only produce male flowers. Then as it gets older, it produces both the male and the female. But the males will flower first and then the female, so it's not self-pollinating. This is another one that may take 4 to 7 years to flower from seed, which needs to be planted as soon as collected. Do not allow this one to dry. A lot of the garden seeds, flower seeds, you'll dry them and plant them in the spring. You can't do that with this one. As soon as you collect it, it's got to be planted. If it dries out, you've lost viability. This plant also has toxic chemicals and should not be eaten raw. If you try and eat something off of this plant, it'll feel like you've got a mouthful of stinging nettles. It's the same chemicals as in stinging nettles. Green dragon. This is related to Jack in the pulpit and is considered rare, although this may be just an artifact of people not noticing it. This in the lower right is the flower in full bloom. It has a similar flower structure to Jack in the pulpit, but with the spadix that extends from the spathe, making the tongue of the dragon. It has multiple leaflets instead of just the 3 leaflets on the 2 leaves. And this is also toxic, also has the same chemicals in it. Mayaples. This common spring wildflower is so toxic that it is used for chemotherapy for cancers. Only the flesh of the apple is edible. And then there is a myth that these are associated with morels, that morels actually grow from the roots of trees and so may be found around mayaples, but they are not necessarily associated with mayaples. Not every patch of mayaples will have morels. You have to look for the trees, not for the mayaples. Now we're getting into some of the orchids. Spring coral root. This species is totally dependent on its fungal host. As a mycoheterotropic, meaning it does not produce its own food. You'll see that this does not have any green on it. And you may notice the little spider here on the flower. Like all orchids, the seed must encounter the correct fungi, in this case, a Russula species, for the seed to germinate. And that's one of the reasons that orchids are so rare. Each plant may produce 1,000 seeds, but less than 1% will actually germinate because they have to come into contact with the correct fungi for that species of orchid. Showy orchis. This is showy with purple or pink hood that grows in moist woodlands that have not had much disturbance. This orchid is associated with fungus in the genus, and I'm not going to try and pronounce that scientific name, Latin or Greek or whatever. That is a disease on cereal grains. And so farmers want to try and get rid of that fungus because it destroys their crops. But this orchid needs that particular species of fungus. Yellow lady slippers. And this is one of the most popular flowers. And like other orchids, it's not real common. This plant has gone through a lot of name changes, and there's no agreement still on if this is one species with several varieties or several species that has a lot of variability. I saw a PBS show saying they do not know what fungus this needs, but I did find an article on how to grow it from seed. So it is one of the more common of the garden grown orchids, because once it's established, it does not need the fungal association. Getting into the trilliums, this is drooping trillium, and it has a lot of names, including drooping wake robin, white trillium, and this can also be a maroon color, the petals, but it's usually white. This is one of the most common of the white flowered trilliums in Indiana, and often the flower will hide below the leaf like bracts. And these are not actually leaves, but they're bracts.
David, we have another question.
Sure.
What type of soil or climate do yellow lady's slipper grow?
Most that I've seen are on hillsides near the top. So they will do fairly well in a drier condition, although they do like the deep loamy soils and slightly acidic pH. Most that I've seen are either in Brown County State Park or Morgan Monroe Forestry that does have a slight acidity to the soils. I've not seen any growing in McCormick's Creek, and they have an alkaline soil. Most of you master gardeners should be aware that plants have a pH preference of what they will grow in. This is one that prefers slightly acidic soils, the yellow lady slippers. Large flowered trillium. This is much less common than the drooping. You can tell by the difference of the narrow leaves, not quite as rounded as the drooping, and that the sepals are separated from the petals. If you look at the trumpet-like flower, and the sepals are well back. If you look at the drooping trillium, you'll see how the sepals are right next to the petals that are curving back between the sepals. And these can be an indicator of deer overpopulation because deer will eat them. And as they are eaten, they grow shorter in response. And so if you're seeing trilliums that are very short, you may have a deer overpopulation. They will grow to a foot or taller, and you have a lower deer population if that's the case.
What are the differences between leaves and tracks?
The bracts, again, that's scientific determination. The leaf has a scar, will leave a scar on the stem when it detaches, and these are actually outgrowths from the stem. They do not have an attachment site like a leaf will have. So you won't have a leaf scar. Snow trillium, these bloom much earlier than the other trilliums. It's also the smallest of the trilliums. These are found in McCormick Creek State Park early in March. These have already bloomed and are done, whereas a lot of our other trilliums are just now starting to flower. Trilliums are separated into pedicellate and sessile, and this is a pedicellate species, although it is much shorter than the previous two. So if you look at this, and you'll see the pedicellate for the flower. These do have the flower up on a stalk, although it's not as long as the other two. Prairie trillium, and you'll see the scientific name for this is recurvatum. This can be separated from the other red trilliums because the sepals will lay down along the stem. You see how this sepal is laying down, and that's what the recurvatum is referring to. The sepals lay down against the stem. Like a lot of spring ephemerals, trilliums take several years to mature enough to flower, and so you may see a lot of plants without flowers, just the three bracts like leaves with no flower actually attached to it. Toadshade, also called a sessile trillium, and you'll notice how the sepals are laying down against the bracts, bract-like leaves. A lot of the trilliums are listed as edible or medicinal, but it should not be collected to eat unless you're absolutely desperate. Wood poppy, often called celandine poppy. We would prefer people not to call it that because of the plant called lesser celandine that is a terrible invasive, and we don't want people to be confused and buy the wrong one. These do have a latex type sap that will stain clothes or hands, yellowish sap. Loose flowered phacelia, also called a fern-leafed or forest phacelia. It's closely related to the water leaves. There is a difference in the sexual parts of the flower. So that's what separates this from the water leaf group. The leaf pattern and open arrangement of the flowers is the easiest way to tell them apart. You'll see how it's got multiple leaflets on the leaves. Miami mist, this is known for the fringed edge to the petals. You'll notice how each of the tips of the petals has a fringe on it. This plant can be found in floodplains, whereas the previous one is generally found on moist upland sites. Appendaged water leaf, also called a great water leaf. This is one of the more common of the water leaf species. Yeah, it can often be seen in the winter and early spring, just as a palmate leaf that have white spotting that gets it gets its name from. You'll see these more mature leaves, the newer leaves do not have the white spotting on them, but over the winter they do. The flowers are usually a light blue, but they can be white in loose clusters. And the loose clusters is a key because the large leaf water leaf, a lot less common, grows in smaller parts of the state. It can be identified by the hairy, pinnately lobed leaves and the tight clusters of white flowers. And you'll see how instead of being a palmate leaf that looks a little like a maple leaf, this one has several lobes on the leaves. The Virginia waterleaf also has a pinnately lobed leaves that are smooth and not hairy. And it's restricted to the northern part of the state. Morgan County is as far south as I have seen it. I've not seen Virginia in Brown County. Might be in Johnson County, but I have not looked. Solomon seal. Now there are two species in Indiana, and this one is the smooth, and it's generally taller, and it does not have hairs on the veins on the bottom of the leaf. So if you want to determine which species of Solomon seal you have to turn the leaf over and look at it with a 10x magnifying lens to see if there's hairs on the veins or not. And this gets its name from the leaf scar on the rhizome that's supposed to look like the seal of King Solomon. This can be started from seed if planted when the berries are ripe, and that's black or purple black, or they can be cold stratified. So as soon as you pick them, put them in some moist towels or sphagnum moss and put it in the freezer, and then plant them in the spring, or you can just plant them where you want them in the fall as soon as they're ripe. Feathery Solomon's plume. It's also called a false Solomon seal. The leaves and the stem on this one look like Solomon seals, but the flowers are at the ends of the stem instead of along the underside of the stem. And this also could be started by sowing the seed, the red berries in the fall when they are ripe. Do not let this one dry out like some of the others. Big yellow wood sorrel, often derided as a weed. This one and the next are only grow in the woods and will not be a weed in your yard or garden. This can be identified by the larger flower that it possesses that usually have red marks in the throat. You'll notice the little red marks here. The wood sorrel that's a weed in your yard does not have this. And then you'll also notice a reddish brown edge to the leaves. And the leaves on this will also be considered considerably larger than the one that's a weed in your yard. Although edible, caution must be used because of the oxalic acid that's in them. If you have kidney problems or are susceptible to kidney stones, you don't want to eat this. Also, if you have liver problems or gout, this can cause flare-ups if you eat it. But if you pick a few leaves and add it to a salad, it gives you a real sharp bite when you're eating it. This is the violet wood sorrel, usually a violet color, but it also can be lighter shades all the way to white. The leaves may have a reddish tinge to them and may have a dark band across the leaf. Now, I tried to show a photo of both the red band and the nice flowers, but I couldn't find one that I had that had both. The flowers and leaves are known to close on cloudy days and will open only when it's sunny. So if it's a nice cloudy day, you may not be able to find these flowers. Cut leaf toothwort. This is also another common spring wildflower. It's a member of the mustard family. And you can tell that because of the 4 petals in the flower. It's also sometimes called pepper root because of the radish-like flavor to the root. This may only be above ground for 1 month. It comes up, flowers, produces seeds, and dies back very quickly. So it's only up for a short period of time. slender toothwort. This is much less commonly found species, only in the southern half of the state. The flowers look just like cut leaf toothwort, but the identifier is the leaves. And you'll see this basal leaf down here has 3 lobes to it, and then the 2 leaves, and they only have 3 leaflets also. 3-parted leaves, and there's much larger 3-parted leaf that can be seen during the winter. This basal leaf is evergreen, so you can find these during the winter and know that you'll have slender toothwort in the spring. Purple spring cress. This is also another fairly common member of the native mustards. You can tell that it's purple, even though it has white flowers, by the hairs on the stem. If you look down here and you see how hairy that stem is, even if the flowers are white, that's a purple spring cress. This is seldom eaten by deer because of the bitter taste of the leaves. Being a mustard, you can eat it, but because the deer don't like it, we probably won't like it either. And they are pretty small. And this one is the white spring cress, also called just a spring cress. Blooms a little bit later in the spring than purple spring cress. It also prefers a wetter site, growing closer to streams or swamps. And this can be eaten with other mixed greens. Because of the peppery taste, you want to mix it in with other things. But you'll see how this has a smooth stem. So you know that that one is the white spring cress. Okay, I could go on for hours, but I must stop somewhere. The little tidbits that I've given in this presentation have been from several sources. Here are some of them that I like. The Illinois wildflowers.info. They have a lot of the same flowers that we'll find here in Indiana. And he has detailed descriptions of how to identify them, what insects use them, whether they're eaten or not. It's very detailed. I also quite often will utilize the Go Botany nativeplanttrust.org website. And then for plant locations, I use the plants USDA.gov Java, and they have an interactive map that will show you where all these different flowers are found. You'll have to zoom in to the state of Indiana, and then it'll show you what counties they've been found in. Just remember that map only shows plants that have been collected and submitted to a herbarium. So generally places like Indianapolis and Bloomington that have universities are well collected and have over 1,000 specimens for that county. But you can go just one county outside to Brown County, for example. And before I started working there, there was 500 specimens collected. So obviously they had a lot of plants that grew there, but nobody had ever bothered to collect them. As an example, I have collected specimens of poison ivy in Owen, Morgan, and Brown counties. And if you would look at the map at USDA.gov, it would show poison ivy did not grow there. They were there, just nobody had ever bothered to collect it. Then if you'd like to contact me, I can be reached at my email, invasivesmorgancounty@gmail.com, or you can join the Indiana Native Plant Society and join me and others on Facebook.
Okay. Typically, how long will the various ephemerals stay in bloom? Are they gone by end of June?
Most will be gone by June. Some will stick around producing seeds, and so you still be able to find the plant. They just won't be in flower any longer. May apples, the fruit generally doesn't ripen until September. And so you'll still see the plant, or at least some, the ones that are producing fruit, that flowers only last a short period of time. One that I did not show, the twin leaf, the flowers last one day. And so it can be very difficult to photograph it because you got to time it very accurately. It took me 5 years to get a photograph of twin leaf. I knew the plants were there. I just couldn't ever get out the day they were blooming. If you have a large patch, it may be 2 or 3 days because different plants are blooming at different times, but still a very short period of time for the flowers. Bloodroot is also known for a very short period of flowering. The leaves will persist throughout the summer. If you know what the leaf look like, you can go out and find the plant. You're not going to see the flowers.
I have been told to never pick Trillium. Is it a protected species?
It is not. Very few plants have any protection in the state of Indiana. Only ginseng has a season on it of when you can dig it, and you cannot possess the root outside of the digging season. All other plants have no legal protection.
That's currently all the questions so far. Oh, wait, here we go. Is wild ginger edible?
It is. It's probably not as good as the ginger you would buy in the store. It was named wild ginger because importing it from the Orient was so expensive, and it was similar, but they do say that it has carcinogens in it, so it's not recommended that you eat it. There's a lot of things. Sassafras is no longer sold straight because it has carcinogens in it. Bloodroot, they don't recommend you use that because it has carcinogens in it. If you had a toothpaste or mouthwash a few years ago that said anti-gingivitis, it probably had bloodroot in it, but they've discontinued using it because of the carcinogenic properties to it.
Is there a way to get rid of the invasive celandine poppy or celandine?
There is nothing that we are aware of yet. Ellen Jacquart in Bloomington is conducting tests. One of the big problems is that it sprouts in January. It's flowering now, and by the end of May, it'll be gone. And so you won't see the leaves. You can't attack it later in the year. Most herbicides require temperatures above 50. And so you've got a short window, January, February, early March. You've got to find a day that's warm enough, no rain, and you've got to get that herbicide because each plant will produce 8, 10, 12 little tubers, and you've got to get that herbicide inside of those tubers to kill them. The hitting it with glyphosate now you're going to top kill it, but you won't kill those tubers. It's putting energy up, not taking energy in. And if you don't kill the tubers, they just come back next year. And it's very difficult to dig lesser celandine because of all those little tubers. You have to run the soil through a sifter and get every one of those little tubers out. You do so much digging, you disturb so much soil, it invites other invasive species in to take its place, like garlic mustard or Japanese stilt grass or something like that. And so digging's not a real good viable option, and we're struggling to find a herbicide that will kill the tubers. So right now we don't have anything that we can recommend to get rid of it. And that's a shame, because in the county I'm in Morgan County, along the White River, we've got areas that it's just a monoculture. You've got some silver maples and cottonwoods, and the ground is just covered with lesser celandine. We need to find something to get rid of it, but it's tough.
Okay,
Yeah.
that looks like it. Mary Claire, do you want to close us out?
First of all, I just want to thank everybody. I don't know if Stephanie has anything to say also, but also the Master Gardeners have a program May 11th, and it's called Backyard Habitat Improvements for Pollinators. And it's on our website now if you want to register and get that Zoom link. Stephanie, did you have anything you wanted to say? Master Gardener Stephanie, that is.
I just wanted to thank David for the presentation. That was great. And maybe we'll have you out here to do one of your walks and see what kind of wildflowers and or invasives we have over here in Bartholomew County. And David, if you want to reiterate any upcoming walks that you have, go ahead and do that.
I do have the hikes in Brown County State Park. They do have to be registered in advance, and they may be full. They're limited to 15. This coming Saturday, I have a wildflower walk at McCormick's Creek. The only thing is that it's at 8 a.m. and you're a bit far to try and get there by 8 a.m. But it is open to everyone. And I see here at the bottom that the link to the Brown County Wildflower 4As has been sent out to everyone. You can try and sign up for my hikes.
Great. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Claire.